Today's episode is brought to you by Larosse Media Incorporated. They make professional videos to fit any budget, so next time you need a commercial, promo, or corporate video, think Larosse. Check them out at larossemedia.com. Hello and welcome to the Stinking Albatross Podcast. My name is Alissa Galope, and I'm here once again with my partner in crime, Scott Hayward. How's it going, Scott?
Pretty good, Alissa. How are you? You are coming toward the end of it.
Of life?
Maybe, I don't know.
Well, we could. I'm such a type A, I have to schedule everything, including when I give birth. So that will be at Tuesday at 8:30 a.m. Well, that will be exactly when I give birth, but that'll be the induction start time. So I hope it goes fast. I think it will. My midwives seem like they think it will. So hopefully for the first time ever, I don't know when your babies have come, but mine always come in the middle of the night. So 8:30 a.m.
Well,
I'm hoping
my
like
babies
dinner
have
hour.
never, because I am not a uterus-bearing person.
That's true.
Oh, sorry,
you're
what
half
did the Supreme
babies.
Court call women? The Supreme Court of Canada called women the other day, one of their rulings, persons with vaginas, I believe. Right? That's how.
Exactly.
Yes.
Well, that's an intimate detail I didn't need to know about you, but okay.
Yeah, surprise. I've never given birth.
But my babies always come in the middle of the night, so this would be great to like have a dinner hour baby and actually sleep through the night. So here's hoping.
Our two kids came in the morning. So Michael would have been born in the morning, around 10:30 in the morning. But his head kept getting stuck on the pubic bone because he was born osteoposterior, which means his back was to my wife's back. So more complicated, unfortunately, but not impossible. Yeah, he kept getting stuck. So he came a couple hours later after lunch, but both would have been born in the morning.
When I had my first baby, like directly after she came out, the doctor at the hospital said, "You have a very narrow pelvis." And I screamed. I was like, "How can I be born with childbearing hips and a narrow pelvis?" Like I was so angry at the anatomy of it all. And then right after he said that, he goes, "So with people like that, sometimes the baby gets stuck, like really lodged, and we have to cut your pubic bone to get the baby out." And I was like, "Can you like wait 10 minutes? Just like a courtesy, maybe 10 or 15 to tell me that." But it's stuck with me forever. So there's a little bit more intimate details about me. But generally, like I hate people's birthing stories and I don't want to know them. I think they're gross.
I'm not a huge fan of labor. I wonder if it's like a paternal perspective in that there's almost nothing I can do, right? Like I can't push for my wife. I can't, I can be there, and that's basically all she wanted both times.
We can bite you. That helps.
Yeah, no, didn't have any of that happening.
Okay.
The first time we tried to do a water birth, and I was feeding her popsicles. She ran out of them pretty quick. Other than that, I'm not a fan of it just because there's nothing I can do to expedite the situation or even alleviate the situation. So not a huge fan of it from that perspective.
Last time in the hospital, Aaron was watching like Game 4 of the Stanley Cup playoffs.
But he's doing it for both of you. He's doing it for both of you. Someone has to, right? Everyone has a role to play.
We weren't doing anything. I was just chilling, so I didn't mind. But,
speaking of which, what do you think of the trade deadline moves or lack thereof?
For me, it was uneventful. For Calgary, it wasn't. But I don't know. Nothing too spectacular, I guess. I would like to see Austin Matthews get his 70 goals, but I'm not sure if that'll happen. But
yeah, he slowed down quite a bit as of late.
Yeah, because Mitch Marner's hurt. So, and I'm just not looking forward to hockey in general, just because we're playing Boston, and there's no like the Leafs playing Boston in the playoffs is akin to like me going into labor right before I give birth, like that final stage of labor. It's extremely painful.
what are the Leafs' options really? Like at this point, Florida is one step ahead of Boston. That
But it
doesn't mean that
doesn't matter.
yeah,
It doesn't matter like the
yeah,
stats or the goals. It just matters that we can't beat them. Like they just can't win. It's something psychological there. It's not like, oh, they're this many points or whatever. They just have the Leafs number and they have forever, and it's just the way that it is.
you know.
So
Washington was in town in Winnipeg the other day, and I was watching that game, and it made me remember Alexander Ovechkin after it was in 2018. It was when they won the cup, and they finally, after years, they finally beat Pittsburgh in a 7-game series in the playoffs. And Washington was celebrating like as if they won the cup. Of
yeah.
course, they won the cup. And Ovi, some for whatever reason, his like English has gotten worse after having here for 20 years. But he was so excited and in broken English, he said, "We finally beat them. We did it. We beat them." And that's all he was excited for. So
Yeah.
it can happen, right? Like it's not
Well, it hasn't
impossible.
happened this year.
No.
So
How many games have they played? 3 or 4?
they've
I
played
know there's
3. They lost all of them, and the last 2 are like almost back to
one.
back, and they lost 4-1 both
It was
times.
almost exactly the same game.
Yeah,
Played
it's
again.
like-
It was in the same week too, or something
yeah,
weird.
it was. Yeah. We have a lot to get into this podcast, so
Yeah,
it
we
will
better
be
get
sort of
into
like it'll be sort of like a flash news sort of thing, and honestly, like 90% of the the stories are coming from Alberta, which is so weird because usually you wouldn't think that. But yeah, lots going on in Alberta, and it's starting with the parental rights policy. And I know we're late on this. This has been like, I think it was the beginning of February this came
been a
out,
month and
but
a half. Yeah.
I think it's still worthy of talking about because we've been following these different parental rights policies, and it's happening in the province in which I live. So, as everyone I'm sure knows, that DeGale Smith put out a parental rights policy. What it specifically says is that it has a ban on gender reassignment surgery for ages 17 and under, no puberty blockers or hormone therapies for the purpose of such surgery for anyone under 15 unless they've already begun. Parental consent for students 15 and under who want to change their names or pronouns at school, and 16 and 17-year-olds would not need consent, but parents would need to be notified. So there's lots to say about this. The first being that it is by far the most strong parental rights policy that we've seen yet, which to me is totally bizarre. I mean, we mentioned it on our last podcast with Anthony a little bit, but just by the pure fact that she flip-flopped to the right side, because all through the election and even the leadership race, she said, kids are, we can't use kids as pawns in political policy, and I have a gender, what does she say? She has some family member.
It's like a niece or a nephew. Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, she just wouldn't, she even said at one point, I think it was the Western Standard debate, that she was in favor of biological men competing in women's sports as long as there was some sort of like criteria. So it was very weird. And I don't know what happened. But it's a good weird.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a couple other things that I think are noteworthy for policy. So you had mentioned the ban on gender reassignment surgery, hormone therapy, parental notification, parental consent. But you also need to have parental opt-in for if this is going to be discussed in the classroom at all. And that any materials used in the classroom that aren't official materials from the Ministry of Education, if they come from a third party, from a source other than the Ministry of Education, they have to be approved prior by the Ministry of Education. And she did a complete flip-flop on the biological men competing in women's sports. That's completely now banned in Alberta for everything that comes under provincial jurisdiction for that. And then the 8th part of the policy, which initially was kind of odd to me, but also makes sense a little bit from some of the stories I've heard from Alberta, is that they don't have a gender reassignment healthcare team. They don't have a surgeon or a physician or anything like that in Alberta that specializes in this. So we've spoken about some people from Alberta, and I forget the person's name, but the Indigenous person who was basically pressured into doing gender reassignment surgery back in like 2009.
Yeah.
when they were like 19 years old, and very depressed about it because now they can't go back, right? There's no detransition because male to female, and once you remove those parts, like that's it. And very, very depressed, and sought the government, federal and provincial government, I think, for help on what to do about this psychologically, maybe physiologically. And there was nothing, and so applied for MAID, and was approved for MAID. Hasn't gone through with assisted suicide, thankfully, and I don't think they're going to. Would have to get an update on that.
Yeah.
But they had to get their gender reassignment surgery and all the, I suppose, aftercare in Montreal because
Yeah.
you don't have that in Alberta. So, I don't really want to see the surgeries, especially for minors, happen, period. But if they are to happen, it kind of makes sense that it would happen in province. So it's still kind of weirds me out a little bit, but that kind of rounds out the policy. But one thing I wanted to talk about here, Alissa, was I watched Danielle Smith's presser on this because she released it one day, and then the next day, less than 24 hours later, had a press conference specifically about and only about the policy, where she answered any and all questions. Well, I mean, within like a half hour or whatever, within a
Yeah.
reasonable time frame. And one of the questions the media went after her about, and by media I mean some members of the legacy media, was about, well, how if these teachers are going to be teaching this in the classrooms, this policy is cumbersome for them to, gather all these materials and then get parental opt-in for, like, every day of the year when they want to talk about this. And then I love Daniel Smith's response, which was, why are teachers talking about this every day of the year? Like, why are you not just talking about it once, maybe 2 times a year, and that's it? And then she went on further saying, if teachers are talking about this every day of the year, then we have a way bigger problem in our schools than I think. She didn't say this, but I think that the media, or at least that media outlet or that journalist specifically, was prepared to talk about. And I
Yeah.
thought that was such a phenomenal response. So we've been really, really hard on Danielle Smith for not being like an actual conservative, and I don't know if she is or she isn't. Frankly, I don't care. I have this rule of politicians where it's like, I don't really care if you identify as pro-life or not. So as long as you're voting for pro-life legislation, you're good by me. This is
Yeah.
kind of a similar situation. I don't know if she actually believes in these things or not, but she's putting them forward. It's very comprehensive. It's probably more comprehensive than most things in continental Europe. It's going to require legislation. I think it requires 10 different ministers to introduce different pieces of legislation because it affects 10 different ministries. Speaking of which, I did speak to a member of the UCP caucus shortly thereafter because you and I were talking about Alissa, and we were talking about some of our friends, and we don't really no one knows and still doesn't really know what precipitated this major change, this flip-flop, this positive flip-flop finally in our direction. And I was speaking to this one member of the UCP caucus, and they said it was their understanding that two different proposals were given to the UCP cabinet about how to deal with this issue. And one was way more tame than the one they went forward with. And it sounded like that most of cabinet, or a good chunk of cabinet, want to go with the more tame one. But Danielle Smith was said absolutely not. And personally, she's like, we're going with this one, and has completely owned it. So, and it's been a month and a half, and they are staying with it. I think their numbers have bumped up a little bit in the polls since then. And it's good to see, because this is going to require legislation that's going to come forward in the autumn. That's going to take a few months to get through. So it won't be till about this time next year when the legislation is actually passed and into statute
Right.
and law. And if the UCP under Danielle Smith can see it all the way through, good on them. That's really great to see.
Yeah, I also found it amusing how this affected federal politics, because you had some wacky things happen. Like, first of all, there was a BC NDP MP, Randall Garrison. He's one of three members of parliament in the NDP caucus who I think he's gay, but
Yeah.
and so he he made comments in the lobby of the House of Commons that there's no such thing as parental rights in Canada. There are parental responsibilities, but children have rights in Canada, and these policies restrict these rights. So it's really creepy to see old white guys saying that children have rights and parents don't have rights. It just does not come off well, because there's only like a very fine line between saying that children have rights about their sexual identity and not about sex, and that's where it leads to ultimately. And then also, just with regards to the Conservative caucus, it was interesting because right after Danielle Smith released these policies, like a lot of the Liberal and NDP MPs and even their leaders talked about it and condemned her for it. But on the other side, Conservatives were super quiet. Like, it was deafening how quiet they were. And then a couple of days later, there were some articles released about a memo that was passed on to the Conservative caucus about how they were told not to say anything. And once that memo was released, then they started to say something because it made them look super weak. But even what they said, I mean, it was good, and they should have just said it from the first place, but it's also like so eye-rolling. For example, Pierre said that children should make adult decisions when they become adults, and that he's against puberty blockers and things like that. But then he always ends it by saying that Justin Trudeau is just trying to use a divisive wedge and distract from doubling housing costs and quadrupling carbon tax. And it's like, actually, no, he's a social liberal. He cares about these socially liberal things. He pushes them. So does Jagmeet Singh. So do all the other provincial left-wing parties. You should be doing that on your side. Like, people get outraged and get passionate about gender affirming surgeries towards minors. They don't get as passionate about quadrupling the carbon tax. Yeah, it's annoying. It sucks. Going to the back gas pump right now in Alberta sucks. The gas is so high right now, and it's only going to get higher because of the carbon tax. But like, that doesn't that doesn't grease my wheels. Like, than people targeting my children. So it's just, he's again off base on that. So I hope that next time a social issue comes out, the Conservatives just keep the memos in their pockets and don't actually send them out and just respond normally, like a normal political party.
It's really interesting to me, Alissa, because I speak to a few friends of ours that work for members of parliament. Yeah. A lot of the times, these staffers, especially the ones who work on Parliament Hill in Ottawa, will also receive these memos from typically they come from the whip's office. And but not all the time. In this case, that wasn't the case. It was just sent to each individual member of caucus. So I'm assuming members of parliament and senators as well. So between the 135 or whatever Conservative members of parliament and senators, someone in caucus released it to the media or released it to a staff member or someone else specifically to get that person to release it to the media. But whatever, it was leaked and not meant to be leaked. So obviously, in the Conservative caucus, there are people who want to talk about this and who are going to force the issue. And so I wonder if Pierre Poilievre and those around him are thinking, well, it doesn't really matter if we tell them to shut up because guess what? They forced us to talk about it. And like when he did talk about it, like he gets better and better on the issue. Does. I will give that to him. And he can be a gifted speaker. Like I do find him very robotic. I find him very kind of cold, very rehearsed. Like I don't find him to speak like a normal human being for the most part. But you know, if he's going to rehearse lines that are good on this issue, then like go for it. And obviously that's what they did, and they're moving on the issue. And so I find with Pierre, and we talked about this with our friend Anthony, who was on our previous podcast, that you know different leaders, and we talked about this too, because Blaine Higgs kind of has that like, aw shucks, like I don't give a damn, like I'm just going to go ahead and consequences be whatever, and I don't care if I win the next election or not, this is the right thing to do. And then you have Scott Moe and respond like in a very kind of measured way, specifically after they almost lost that by-election in Lumsden Morse in rural Saskatchewan. And then you have Danielle Smith that does a complete flip-flop amongst the premiers, and now you have Pierre Poilievre who's moving on the comms, on the communication side, better and better. And typically I find with Pierre that policy follows communications, right? Not
Right.
vice versa. And different leaders have different styles, and that's fine. So I suspect that there's going to be some sort of policy announced at some point between now and October 2025, when the next general federal election will occur, on what the Conservatives are going to do in power on this issue. Because when he says, like, oh, it's a provincial issue and the federal government can't really do anything about it, is very disingenuous, because of course you can do something about it. You can amend the Criminal Code of Canada to make this type of surgery illegal for certain people. I mean, that's what we did for abortion, and that's what we did for assisted suicide until the courts took it over. And by the way, if the courts do rule, let's say, incorrectly on this issue, are you going to fight the courts
Right.
with using the notwithstanding clause? So, like, there are a couple, like, he's not wrong in that there's a lot more that the provinces can do and that they are doing, and successfully thus far in a lot of the provinces. But there is definitely things you can do federally. So I'll be interested to see that. Another issue that you can do federally, because this is coming up soon, are the Olympics. And what are you going to do for biological males wanting to compete with
Yeah.
biological females in female categories? And does the International Olympic Committee going to recognize that? Because a lot of people don't realize that while this issue is burning, in North America, in continental Europe, in places like France and places like Sweden, this is actually not all that controversial. Most people on both sides of the political spectrum in those countries are united on, yeah, you know what, we're not gonna go down this like crazy path of, obviously this isn't the truth. A biological male competing against a biological female. So like they're gonna, the next government, whether it be conservative or liberal or whatever, is gonna have to deal with that for the Olympics starting in 2026 and whatnot. And one last thing I'll say on that is, you and I were there in Quebec City, where there were a couple of policies that are the official policy of the Conservative Party of Canada,
Yeah.
passed by massive majorities, including quite a large majority in a place like Quebec, for example. The
Yeah.
delegates from Quebec on the issue of gender reassignment surgery for minors, puberty blockers for minors, as well as biological males competing in female sport, as well as, by the way, prisons and homeless
Right.
shelters as well.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll definitely keep an eye out on that.
Nature communicates with us in a universal language. The sunrise starts a new day. The sunset marks our accomplishments.
The most beautiful communication is where the speaker and the listener match perfectly and understand the same message.
Your future audience is waiting to hear from you. What message do you need to share?
At LaRosse Media, we fashion beautiful communications through our professional video production services and marketing strategies.
Create your own most beautiful message. Visit larosmedia.com and be sure to check out our extended service options.
Dream, produce, market, succeed with LaRosse Media.
Serving Canada, from coast to coast to coast.
There was a story recently that came out of Alberta as well, about chemical abortions. And it was found out that there's a new medical abortion clinic which offers DIY chemical abortions via telemedicine since June 2023. And so when a Western Standard reporter talked to the spokeswoman about this, and she said, what do you do with the fetus or baby or whatever when it's expelled at home? And the woman said that they just flush it down the toilet usually, which was really distressing and disturbing to hear. But there's a lot of problems with this, and I don't think too many people knew this existed until this story came out. But like, one of the first questions I have is that, I mean, you have, just from experience, I don't specifically know, sometimes I haven't specifically known how old the baby is when I take the pregnancy test. Like, so you have to get that first original dating ultrasound. So how, if you could do a chemical abortion up to 9 weeks, how do you know exactly that the baby's around 9 weeks or 8 weeks? It could be older or ectopic pregnancy or something like that. And you're just guessing, and then you're putting all these chemicals into your body. Like, that's just a recipe for disaster. And I like it when they say it's bringing the back alleys to the bedrooms, because that's essentially what these clinics are doing.
Who said that? That's an excellent turn of phrase.
I just made it up. I don't know. I can't remember who I read it, but I've read it for a while, right? Like since surgical abortions have lessened and chemical abortions, Ru-486 was passed and brought to Canada in 2015, and then implemented in 2017. And then, like Alberta was the first province to completely fund Ru-486, and the other provinces followed suit. So I think that's just been a common terminology since these chemical abortions have been brought to light and come to Canada. And, with regards to funding, they're cheaper than surgical abortions. An average surgical abortion is $800 to $1,000. But Ru-486 is a lot more common, and it's about $300 per pill. And everything is completely covered by taxpayers.
Yeah, and it's interesting because there was a woman who died from Ru-486 in Canada from, I think, septic shock, and that was in 2022. And this is an unfortunate. This is a common occurrence that has occurred in the United States, in France, I believe, and it was a big reason as to why for years it wasn't allowed in Canada. So we talked about it on a previous podcast, but when my wife was in the hospital during her miscarriage earlier this year, the doctors asked her, well, do you want to take Ru-486 to ensure that, everything is out of your uterus? And she said, no, absolutely not. And the doctor said, yeah, that's a good choice. I would probably recommend, I think he said, she could correct me if I'm wrong, I think he said he would either recommend not to or does recommend that women do not, in general, when they're experiencing a miscarriage, to take Ru-486 because the bleeding is just so intense and the blood loss is way through the roof. So, that's it is interesting. Like, and this is something we have known in the pro-life movement for a number of years, that the proportionality of abortions in this country is going to switch quite significantly. I mean, it is, as we're speaking, between surgical and chemical abortions. But in a way, and like, I don't wish or hope that any, woman die from this. But I mean, frankly, like, as time goes on, it already happened, right? It already happened a year and a half ago. So there's a good chance that statistically that's just going to increase. And it might be a situation where the pro-abortion movement in this country has gone a bridge too far, have pushed it to a bridge too far, and it provides another opening, another opportunity to get people to kind of question, what are we really doing here? We've seen this already. We've seen this on the trans for kids issues, right? We just talked about that. We've seen this big time on assisted suicide. Like, I would not be surprised if you did polling in this country about the number of people who say, you know what, like, I was for assisted suicide back in like 2014 or 2015 when it meant that grandpa who's 89 years old and has pancreatic cancer and is going to die in 3 months, we just kind of kill him now so he doesn't have to suffer anymore, put him down like a dog, so to speak. That has gone way off the rails and expanded from that. So I wouldn't be surprised if you did polling today, people who held that position in, let's say, 2014 or 15, 16, would now have the position, this has gone way, way overboard, and you know what, let's just not allow this, period.
Yeah, because like, even when you go into abortion clinics, they have to offer you counseling first, or most, they don't have to, but most do. And so you can kind of get it, and the women have to go it alone. So you sort of have a picture of why they're there, even though they don't usually ask you specifically. But in the case of telemedicine and them sending you a package in the mail or whatever, there could be so many abuses. Someone could be coerced. It could be for human trafficking. Like, it's harder to catch these things. And it just seems generally completely unsafe, especially when there have been studies saying that 1 in 5 women suffer complications, including infection, and women who self-administer chemical abortions are 50% more likely to visit an emergency department within 30 days of doing so. And it just makes sense. because like you're home alone or maybe in an abusive situation, you're taking like very powerful drugs enough to kill something inside of your body, a human being inside of your body, and then you're just told to flush it down the toilet. And like, what if you keep bleeding? What if, there's so many what ifs. So the whole thing is very icky and disturbing from start to finish. And I hope that they just get rid of it altogether, because it's not clearly good for the baby, and it doesn't seem like it's very good for the woman either.
Yeah, and I don't believe provinces can control whether or not the drug is administered in their provinces. I think they can control how it's administered. So when the
And if it's paid for.
If it's covered by the provincial health insurance plan, that's right. Yeah. So in Manitoba, when the Progressive Conservative Party was in power, Calvin Gertson, who was Minister of Health at the time when this all occurred and landed on his lap, he was able to convince the rest of the cabinet that, okay, like we will pay for it, but you have to get it in person. You have to come talk to someone, and it will only be administered at two specific locations in Winnipeg. And it was designed because it was very, very, very serious. And it was, of course, I think designed to, not have it so widespread. So I don't know if that's still the case in Manitoba, unless the NDP have changed it. And the NDP haven't really changed a whole lot. I mean, we're going to get to that in a little bit. Maybe that's a good segue for another segment here right away. But I don't think it's changed in Manitoba. So different provinces could do different things. And it's really important. This is really important that when, certain political parties that come into power, whether provincially or federally, that have the support of pro-lifers or have a good number of pro-lifers in caucus or have pro-lifers who are appointed to specific positions, like when Kelvin was Minister of Health, that they do things like this, or they have a plan in place to like really think about how can we basically save lives here. And so it'd be really, really positive to see, a future Conservative Minister of Health, federal Minister of Health in the next, 2 years, because you don't need an act of parliament. You don't even need an order in council and cabinet. A minister of health federally can say, no, we're not allowing this in our country. And that's that. It's just a ministerial directive.
And in the opposite way, you would think that someone who worked in the pro-life movement for, 20 years or 15 years would be that person. But that's, again, not the case in Alberta, because you have the health minister, Adriana LaGrange, saying recently that Alberta is not going to be part of the NDP Liberal National Pharmacare plan. And she just preempted questions about abortion and contraception by already touting that they fund it fully, including chemical abortions. And mifepristone, which is the Ru-486 drug, which is $300 per pill. So, she should be following in Kelvin's direction and trying to mitigate that rather than touting it in the media and in front of the whole province, saying, oh no, we're going to completely cover this and this is what it does, and don't worry about that. Like, how can you be like that after working in the pro-life movement? There's such a huge cognitive dissonance there, and it's so bizarre to me. So I don't get it. And it's something that recently happened. And hopefully there's enough backlash from Albertans that she does follow in Kelvin's footsteps. But another sort of downfall of the UCP here, not being as conservative, especially the pro-lifers not being as pro-life as they should be.
Yeah. And speaking about Manitoba, there's a change in government, and our good friend Nahani Fontaine, who's the Minister of whatever, I think women or gender, the diversity, inclusion, whatever. She's the MLA for St. John, I believe, and which is basically downtown Winnipeg. And the last two legislative assemblies, after election 2016, after election 2019, she's introduced bubble zone legislation in Manitoba. Manitoba doesn't have bubble zone legislation. It's one of the few provinces that does not. And it's failed every time because there was a progressive conservative majority. Now she's introduced it as a cabinet minister, so it can be a piece of government legislation. and that was introduced last week. And with an NDP majority, there's a good chance that she'll actually get that passed. So, anyways, right now we'll be working to make sure that we had a bunch of people sign a petition recently, our Life Month petition back in October. So, as we're getting them online into our system, we're going to be informing them of a petition that we're going to be running there to make sure that people also contact their members of the Legislative Assembly, MLAs, whether it be Progressive Conservative or NDP or Liberal, and to encourage them to vote against this legislation.
Yeah, that'll be good. And I always find it comical how like people say they're so pro-choice, yet they don't want to give women the alternative choice to abortion, which is a lot of the times what these people are doing. They're offering abortion alternative information. So it just goes to show you that a lot of people who say they're pro-choice aren't actually pro-choice. They're specifically pro-abortion. And then finally, there's a dad, again in Alberta, who is trying to stop his 27-year-old daughter from getting assisted suicide. So currently an Alberta father has asked a judge to block his daughter from accessing assisted suicide because he believes she is ineligible and unable to consent despite physicians approving her application. So she's a 27-year-old girl who has autism, who lives with her parents, and she has a history of doctor shopping. So she actually applied a year ago, and one doctor denied her application and one approved it. And then she shopped around and she found a couple doctors here in Alberta who did approve her application. And then the dad was able to get a temporary injunction preventing her from actually going through with it. So he found out the day before. Her date was set for February 1st, 2024. He found out the day before, rushed into action, got this temporary injunction, and now they're actually hearing the full case. And the judge reserved his decision on whether he'll set aside the temporary injunction. And the other part of his decision will deal with the judicial review, which will take place, which will examine how the doctors came to sign off on her application in the first place, because her death isn't foreseeable and she doesn't meet the criteria clearly. So we'll see what happens with this, but it's so sad. But I am glad that he was able to get that temporary injunction, because you've heard of cases worse than this where that wasn't the case. So it would be really great to set that precedent that, you know, just because you doctor shop and just because you may find some doctors who approve of your submission doesn't mean that it should actually be approved. And it should go as a warning to doctors in the future who want to just willy-nilly approve applications that there will be consequences.
Yeah, that dad should get Dad of the Year award for sure.
Yeah.
Like what a man to step up to the plate and step in and help save his daughter's life. Obviously, I mean, who knows? Like, I don't know what the situation is between that father and his daughter and in years past or whatever, or what that relationship is like. But obviously at this point, the relationship's strong enough that he doesn't want her to die, at least not anytime soon, and definitely not by assisted suicide. So, this will be an interesting case. And it kind of like, it's more fodder, if you will, for the Conservative Party of Canada to say, you know, when we come into power, we're really going to change. It's not just taking away, those who have mental health issues to apply for assisted suicide. Like, it really needs to be trimmed back. As far as I'm concerned, it just needs to be eliminated. And I think I think the ground is set for, if there is a campaign that's out there that says, you know what, this has gone way overboard. And initially those people, you know, the 89-year-old with the pancreatic cancer that's going to die in 3 months, we're just going to put all our money and resources into making sure that we have proper palliative care so he can die as comfortable and as pain-free as possible. Unfortunately, the human condition is such, especially toward the end of life, that it's not necessarily a pleasant and comfortable situation. That's just a fact of human life, and it's something we all have to prepare for. Sometimes it happens very suddenly and very quickly, sometimes very peacefully, and of course sometimes very low and long and painfully. And for those of us who are, of course, believing, there's always a reason for it. And that's not to say that, you know, you don't intervene and help those people as much as possible to help them on that last leg of their journey of life before they die. But killing them. It's so dark and twisted and fascinating at the same time how addicted people become, especially in positions of power and authority, like in the healthcare profession, to killing people so easily, so quickly. You would
It's
think that
certainly
a
a
lot
God
of,
complex for sure.
yeah, you'd think that a lot of these physicians that are signing off on these applications and approving these assisted suicides, you would think that they never really thought that they would be in such a position in in medical school all those years ago. And perhaps there are a few of them, or like a little portion of a few of them, that actually think that they're helping someone out. But when they, in this case of this 27-year-old woman, like, how?
Yeah.
Especially when she obviously has a loving enough father that wants to alleviate the situation. I'm sure wants to alleviate the situation in such a way that she actually wants to live out the rest of her natural born life.
Yeah.
It's very disturbing. But the flip side of that, because this is a political podcast, is politically salient, and there's a powerful message to be had there, and to actually implement proper policy and to have a mandate to do so. I was reading this one article, I can't remember who it was by, about a week or so ago, about, what will Pierre Poilievre actually have the mandate to do once he becomes prime minister? Because should Pierre and the Conservatives win the election in October 2025, what are the things they've been talking about? Well, they've been talking about axe the tax. They've been talking about, okay, stop the crime a little bit when it comes to things like mandatory minimum sentencing for car theft, which is something I'm necessarily against. Balancing the budget ish, maybe doing something with the military, maybe it's really very little like that
I
they will
yawned
have.
while you were talking just because it was so boring.
Yeah. But really, like, it's not a whole lot of things that they're actually running on. And so when they come into power, if they start doing these things and a lot of these things that we're talking about, whether it be amendments to the Criminal Code of Canada for banning sex reassignment surgeries and hormone therapies for minors, whether it be amending the Criminal Code of Canada, saying, you know what, we're just going to ban assisted suicide again, and if the courts have a problem with it, we'll just overrule the courts of Section 33. I think these are popular policies, but if you're not talking about them in somewhat of a substantive way prior to people casting their votes, once you come into power, because Conservatives are really, really bad for this in this country, people are going to be like, oh, well, we didn't really talk about it, so do we really have a mandate for it? And should we not upset the apple cart? You're going to miss your opportunity to actually affect change in these policies, whether it come to Ru-486 banning that or banning assisted suicide, saving lives.
People are just so obsessed with beating Trudeau that there's like an afterlife to that. What happens after? But that's all people super care about right now, which I understand to a certain extent. But life goes on. The country moves on from that. And there needs to be a plan other than just balancing Liberal budgets, like you like to always say. And I'm glad that we had Anthony on because he boistered that point quite well. It is in that interview. So if you haven't checked that out, go check that out from a couple weeks ago.
We live in a world that grows through communication.
Every connection comes from a dream to be heard and realized.
To welcome a better future. What are your dreams?
LaRosse Media will help communicate your vision through our professional video production services and marketing strategies.
Start building connections to your future audience. Visit larosmedia.com
and be sure to check out our extended service options.
Dream, produce, market, succeed with LaRosse Media.
Serving Canada from coast to coast to coast.
So next time that I'll see you and be on the podcast, I'll have another baby Earth side, which is freaky. And I'll, in true Alissa fashion, introduce you to him. as long as he's not like a really ugly baby. You know, sometimes that happens. But yeah, please pray for me over the next few days, and hopefully all is well with you and your family. And we'll talk to you guys soon. Make sure that you follow us.
Wait. So your induction is scheduled for Tuesday the 19th, right?
Yeah.
So like, there's probably like a decent chance you're going to give birth that day, right?
Oh, I couldn't imagine not.
You have to incorporate the name Joseph somehow into your son's name.
Well, yeah. Joseph is the godfather. It's on the feast of St. Joseph. My grandfather, who was a priest, name is Joseph. It would be like criminally insane not to have a Joseph in there, but it's a middle name. It's not the first name.
I'm going to call him Joey no matter what.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, the name is... We'll see what the name is.
Don't tell people the name right now.
I'm not. Aaron would murder me. Aaron hates it when I tell people the name. And we're like going back and forth about some middle names, which I will talk about next time.
Is the first name at least agreed upon right now?
It was from the very beginning. The only issue that we have with it is it's not a biblical name, and it's not it's not necessarily a Christian name. Like, there's a derivation? Is that how you say it?
Diminutive?
Of it, like there's a Saint blah that comes from this name. Do you know what I mean?
Right, yeah.
But there's not like a Saint blank.
Right.
And it's not a biblical name. But we like it.
Okay.
But the biblical name
it's going to be something weird, like what Sarah Palin was naming her kids, like Twig or something like that.
Are my kids' names ever weird?
No,
your kids'
so
names are weirder than my kids' names.
Okay, I don't think it's a competition, but
my thing about names is I like that because no one could pronounce my name growing up, that they have to be able to like pronounce it, read it, say it, but also that it's classic, preferably Christian saint name, that kind of thing. But yeah, it's really we couldn't find anything from the Bible or.
See, like I feel like the name Stanislav fits that criteria perfectly.
That's like when we were at Mass and there was someone who's getting baptized named Wolfgang.
That's
so
amazing.
I asked the girl, I was like, are you going to call him Wolf, like for short? She's like, no. I was like, okay.
Even Mozart's nickname was Wolfie, I think. I think his wife called him Wolfie.
I mean, I have one of my good friends here. Her two kids are Henry and Fulton. Can't get more Catholic, and they're like half Filipino.
That's amazing.
I don't think I ended this thing yet. But,
no. Yeah, let's wrap this up.
Make sure that you follow us on YouTube, Rumble, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, anywhere you get your podcasts. And we'll talk to you next time. Thanks for joining us.
Bye for now.